Lunch and Learn. We are here looking at my best mate, ChatGPT, and Power BI. And can we cheat? What can we do to cheat in Power BI using ChatGPT? I wanted to give it a bit of a score today, and based on all of the things we've learned so far about what you can do in Power BI with ChatGPT. Just to summarize our kind of findings, and then obviously with the release of Microsoft Fabric, we want to have a bit of a look at that as well. And then future episodes of Lunch and Learn was probably just going to be me tooling around with Fabric, right? Learning the platform. I have had a bit of a head start because I was on the beta, but we definitely want to go through the process of checking out Fabric. So here's our awesome report that we built last time. Might open that one up, which wasn't very awesome. So I did do it. I've done some kind of interesting stuff with ChatGPT. I think there's some areas where it's really, really strong and some areas where it's really, really weak. And we kind of discovered a few of those last week when we went through trying to create DAX from scratch. It's not particularly good at kind of inferring context or creating DAX from scratch. And if you didn't know what you were doing, you would get yourself into a pretty deep hole pretty quickly, I think, with DAX and Power BI. See if this actually refreshes. But I think there is some stuff that it's really strong at. So I kind of wanted to quickly summarize that stuff and then quickly go through kind of what I've done and maybe get some feedback from you guys if you've done anything else with Power BI and ChatGPT that you think it could be good at. So I might start making my list over here. I've got my little Excel spreadsheet open and then we'll give it a score. So the first thing is around gathering requirements, right? So if you're thinking about the start of a data project, and you're gathering requirements from users, you're trying to analyze tables and understand what they're doing. This is an area where I think ChatGPT is really strong. So the first thing was, and I've created, what I've done is create little bots for each of the with names, also so that I can identify them, but also so that I can use use these prompts when I need to do it. So the first one is, this one's called Analyst Annie. And I've given it quite a long prompt to define what it does, okay? And what I've done, I've broken ChatGPT up into different bespoke kind of tasks that it can perform to give it like a single task type thing. And I find that the more context you give it like that, where you give it just a single task and it does that, it's much stronger as what it does. So the first, this is Analyst Annie. So its task is to analyze provided data sources, understand and document the structure, clarify any ambiguities. You don't need to analyze the data content, just the structure. So this is I think the first episode we were talking about analyzing data structures, and this is quite good at that. So you can pop this into I'll pop this into the chat if you want to steal Analyst Annie from me. You can feel free to do that. I just got to maximize this. Open up the chat. So that's a prompt for analyzing tables, and it's pretty good. Like, it does a pretty good and then job. So I tell it to, say a greeting. So it's, hi, I'm Analyst Annie, your dedicated data bot. I'm here to help understand and document the structure of your data sources. And then I paste in the data source and it provides me that list that we showed last time, right? Which is like it gives you a list of all the column names and a description of the column and what the data type is for that. I usually will paste the first line in. I like this as a first step when you're analyzing a table of data because for a couple of reasons. One, because you don't need to give all the data, right? I think right now it's a mistake to paste whole tables of data into ChatGPT or another large language model and ask it to analyze data. I think there's too much room for hallucination there. But I think it's very good at understanding kind of the structures and helping you document stuff. So I give that a big tick. So I'm going to put down document table structures. I reckon that's it's probably like an 8 or a 9 out of 10. Maybe not perfect, it might get things wrong occasionally, but the document table structure is about an 8 out of 10. So the second bot I kind of made was one that's called Question Quentin. Here he is, Question Quentin. or Quinton. Uh, and question Quinton. His role is to take analyst Annie's output. So you give him the table that she generates, and he helps you understand. Like he comes up with ideas about questions that you could ask about the data contained within. I think this really nicely supplements what you do with users and when they come to you with like a new request, right? Because often they will give you like a limited list of things that they're kind of after, and sometimes they're looking for more. They're looking for, well, we'd like to get some ideas about what could be visual based on this data. If you're asked that question, you can look really good by just being able to come back with a list of questions that could be asked about this data. I also starting broad strokes with things like ChatGPT and then getting it to refine down seems to be the best way to do that. And so starting with kind of broad strokes questions, you could use this to help design your report. So you can say, well, it looks like we can do least and most purchased items. That could be a page on your report. Correlations between purchased items and other items, demographics, like it helps you kind of design the structure of your reporting as well when you see the patterns of questions that could be asked about that report based just what's on the data. And so if you're given like a random data set to analyze, you can use this prompt to capture some extra questions, or just save your brain from having to think of them, right? So here's your prompt for that. I'll post that in the chat as well. That's question Quentin. And I think for kind of questioning that kind of thing, I'd probably give it like a 7 out of 10. It's pretty good. It doesn't necessarily come up with the most original, like interesting things, and I think, but I do think it does a very good job compared to like a single person who might only be able to come up with a few of these questions, right? So I think it supplements that idea of gathering requirements really well. So questioning or creating business questions based on data sets. I'm going to give it I'll give it like a 7, I reckon, a 7 out of 10. My little scoreboard's happening over here. We'll look at it at the end. Okay. Next on the list, I was thinking about, there's one thing that's really good at, and I haven't got a predefined bot for this, is when the customer the customer sends you their requirements in written form, summarizing that right into like a list of just taking out the important information, because they often repeat themselves and they go in a bit of a funny order, and they sometimes they conflate different things together. And ChatGPT is really good at taking a randomly written email from a person who doesn't really know what they're talking about, and then breaks it down into, okay, we need to build a report that has this, and this as a summarized version of the requirements. Again, you have to be careful with data privacy. Don't forget that you have the option to turn off your where is that? Beta features. Oh, plugins. I can turn them on. Cool. I'm not going to do that right now. Where is that thing? Oh, chat history and training. It's right here. Sorry. Chat history and training. If you're dealing with anything private, at a minimum, you want to turn that off. And to be honest, I would probably remove any identifying data from emails or anything like that before you pasted it into any of this kind of stuff, just to be double safe. Rename everybody to, the Sesame Street characters or something. Okay, and then obviously get rid of email addresses and things like that. But like the text of things, as long, and identifying of company names, things like that. So that's summarizing requirements for summarizing written requirements. I'll probably give that. It's almost, I reckon that's a 9 out of 10. It's really good at summarizing stuff. All right. Uh, who did I send next in the list? Was it? It's not Visionary Victoria. It's Fact Finder Frank and or Modeler Max. One of these two. Let me think about this. What does Fact Finder Frank do? Analytical. You create fact tables. You're provided with a data structured document that comes from Analyst Annie, a list of questions that comes from Question Quentin, and dimension tables designed by Modeler Max. All right. I think from memory, when I was messing around with this the order that you do things in is really important. And I think doing the dimension tables first wasn't ideal. Let me think about that. Or maybe I had to do the dimension tables first to make it work. Let me see what I say about the dimension tables. This is Modeler Max. He creates dimensions. Okay, so we give him the data structure document and a list of questions generated by Query Quentin and Analyst Annie. They guide designing your dimension tables. Outputs M code, and he just does dimension tables. So then I send him some dimensions. I just send him the table of data. Originally, Analyst Annie's output was JSON, which I thought would be cool. And then I changed it to just that table that she outputs because I preferred it. I made it a bit more readable. But you could do either. I mean, ChatGPT doesn't care. It'll take JSON, no problem. And then a bunch of questions from Question Quentin. What's the average DIFOT and all this kind of stuff. And then so he says, okay, you can create a year, month, state, carrier, and delivery type set of dimensions. So the interesting thing here is the year month. He created a year dimension and a month dimension instead of a date dimension, right? So there's work to be done here with modeling. It's very, very good if you can guide the structure yourself. So if you're a complete noob at Power BI, you're definitely going to struggle pretty much at this point onwards. If you're gonna rely on trying to get a large language model to help you kind of build stuff, because it is going to kind of send you in kind of poor practice directions based, like if the data's got year and month in it and you ask it to create dimension tables, it's going to tell you that it's going to tell you to create a year and month dimension. What might be interesting is if we gave it the same input. So we'll try this. I'll create a new chat with Max in it. Let's go back to Max, modeling Max. Copy out his prompt. It's really hard to, all right. You don't need the prompt bit at the end. That's just a sample prompt. Okay, new chat, GPT-4. Okay, so then I tell it, hi, it says, hi, I'm Modeler Max. I'm ready to assist you with your data into a star schema and creating dimension tables. So if I give it a table now, we'll give it some output from Annie. Probably don't need to give it questions. Maybe we could. Where's Annie gone? There's always a risk that ChatGPT will completely lose it. Oh no, it's all good. Here's the detailed structure of the second table. Oh, we've got shift breaks. Okay, let's use this one. Now I have found that going up is easier than going down, so I'm going to do that when you're copying tables. All right, let's copy this table. Go back to our modeling Max. Hi Max. We have right, so I give it a table. Table doesn't come out very well, but it can read it, so it doesn't really matter. And then you say, what set of dimensions? I'm instead of getting it to immediately generate code, I'm trying to get it to define an approach instead. Okay, so he's going to tell us an approach. We need an employee following dimension. We could have the following dimension tables. Okay, here we go. See what it does with dates and things. Employee time preferences. Oh, preferred hours, part-time, fixed hours, expected hours in pay, days overtime average. Hmm, okay, interesting. Employee security details. Oh, that's obviously had a passcode and login details. This table. So you can kind of get it to suggest dimensions and then maybe refine that before it actually generates M code or something for those dimensions. So have a bit of a play around with that anyway. I think it's, if you know what you're doing, then it can save you a bunch of time because it can generate stuff for you. The other thing that it lacks is, and I created one called Connector Carl, is that it lacks the initial connection. So you probably will have to provide it with. So if we go to the edit query, there's probably something here where we need to add this M code in so that it knows what the connection first looks like. Anything that generates M code, like you want it to, let's see what I do if I get it to have a look at this one. Okay, ignore that table. You have customer, stock item. These are all dimensions we already have, so it should theoretically get the right dimensions. Salesperson, which I think is employee. Yeah. So it can read M no problem, right? Like it inferred the table structure from these transform column types here. And it should, now that it's got this connection information in it, be able to generate code to create, say, let's create a salesperson dimension.
I don't know what it is, but it just makes me so happy. Like I just love watching it work. It's so fun.
It's incredible, isn't it? Yeah, I love it. All right, so it's assumed that there's a salesperson.csv that's got the salesperson key in it, that's got the salesperson information in it, which I think in the actual report, it's maybe something slightly, it's employee. And the source is WWI export employee. But I wonder if I just copy this out, or if I create a new, I'll create a new blank query. We'll see how its query goes. And then we change this to, so it just said C users admin salesperson.csv. I'm pretty sure that's not where it is. Just have a quick look for it. I had it in like shared data. Okay, well that'll break, and then we'll find the proper path, which is this one. I'm surprised it didn't get the proper path there, to be honest, because I did paste something in it that had the proper path in it. It should at least have gotten the proper path right. Let's see. Right, the headers, and then it looked for salesperson key because it was a change type, automatic change type. So it didn't quite do that. So see, it kind of is kind of a bit awkward doing anything where you're getting it to generate code from scratch. You're going to have a lot of problems. So generating code from scratch, probably like, I'll say generating M code from scratch, but it's the same with DAX. I give it like maybe like a 3 out of 10 because yeah, it's it's no faster than if I probably just did that inside Power BI. Now, when they have Copilot and it can do it for you, and maybe you can just point it at the file, obviously it'll be heaps faster. So that'll be interesting to see how kind of Copilot evolves. But I wouldn't be using ChatGPT to generate anything that involves code from scratch unless you're doing it very incrementally.
Yeah, and you can actually get it to reflect on its own code that it just generated, and it generally gives you a better result. So you say something like, can you please review your last response and reply with any logical problems that may be in the previous response, and output the improved code in thing, and let's think about this step by step. And it will go review its last response and actually find, oh yes, I've got all these problems, and then
Exactly. It is quite good if you give it errors or you give it feedback. It's really good at adjusting. So this is an interesting one where I did the same thing but for SQL, right? This is slightly different in that I was getting it to get the most recent version. It was a snapshot table we were doing, and I was getting it to get the most recent version of a snapshot, and I wanted to test to see how it would work. Just if I just gave it kind of fairly basic kind of instruction here. And then it generated SQL. It generated SQL that didn't quite work. So I had to then step it back. I gave it the table structure. So you use Analyst Annie for that, I guess, if you want to, or you can just throw it in. And then it tried to generate it all like this, like completely with a couple of like table expressions and put it all together. That didn't quite work as well. So then I had to step it back. First, it gave it to me when it does T-SQL. It doesn't do T-SQL. It does MySQL or Postgres by default. So you have to be careful of that. So then I had to change it to T-SQL, which is great. It just automatically changed it. There was no problem there. This SQL wasn't too bad, but it didn't quite do so I said that it's returning incorrect values here, right? You got 9 lines for a single item count and all this kind of stuff. And it was just there was a bit of context that I needed to give it. You kind of needed to build this SQL query incrementally to get to the answer anyway. And it was a little bit of me needing to kind of resolve that with myself. And so we messed around a little bit. And I'm like, look, we're still not getting to the expected values. Let's do this incrementally. First, we'll create a query that gets all the distinct orders that are open in a current month, right? And then that started me on the right path. And then I could incrementally, okay, we need this to be a distinct list of the orders. So then it changed the SQL again, and then it changed it again and changed it again. Now, doing this method, we actually got really good kind of outcome in the end. I don't know, like I'm not really a SQL expert. And so I don't know if it was optimized SQL at the end as good as it could be, but it was way better than what I could have written for what was quite a complex kind of query that I needed to think through. And so this kind of almost like me kind of knowing, I know the sort of incremental process I need to go through to get that. I've done enough kind of data transformation to know, okay, first we need this, then we need that. And I've obviously done a heap of Power Query, but to translate that into SQL, I wouldn't have been able to do, but to get it to just write the SQL and me to step it through the process, it was really good. So if you have the opportunity, if you're generating something from scratch, you need to really think about the incremental way that you build your queries or you build your DAX or whatever. It's similar with DAX. You can give it a really complex DAX kind of question and it'll generate a whole bunch of stuff, but it won't be right and it'll be awkward. But if you say, okay, first let's just create a sum of the sales column, and then take the sum of the sales column and do the next thing, and then let's get the average of that and do it over there. If you're doing that kind of incrementally, it does seem to be able to do that. So incrementally generating code from scratch and following advice and then taking feedback, I'd say it's very strong at. So I don't know how to put that on my scoreboard, but I'll call that incremental code generation.
The other way to do it incrementally like that is you can ask it to respond with any questions, which would help to define its code as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
So you do your initial prompt, you say, please respond with your improved response in full, and then please ask me any clarifying questions that might help you improve the response in the future. Let's iterate on this and it'll give you the response, and then it asks you all kinds of questions. You just fill them out, and then it does it again.
Yeah, and I think that kind of incremental approach, even with things like story writing, right? You can get it to, you can say, write me a story about a unicorn made out of fabric that traveled down the, traveled down the lane, and it will come up with a story, but it'll be pretty crap. But if you break down, say, okay, first let's create a character description, and then let's create a story arc for this character where these major events kind of happen during the story, and then let's break each of those that story arc into 30 chapters, and then you take those 30 chapters and you break each chapter down into 5 sections. Then you take those 5 sections, now write the first section of the first chapter and maintain the story arc and do, then it's really, really good. But you have to go through this process of setting all of the context and putting all the framework in place to make that work. And I see that as a similar thing with code. You need to kind of lay the foundation of what's happening first, and then it's very good at kind of, and then you can say, analyze this thing. Do you think that you could improve it? And as you are kind of saying there, Michael, that it's really good at kind of providing feedback even on itself. And you say, write it in a different way, or be more flowery in your language, or be less flowery, or like there's all that kind of stuff that you can do. So that kind of increment, that seems to be this kind of superpower of large language model use, is being able to use them incrementally like that. You can get amazing outcomes. Like that code that we wrote for SQL, it would have taken, somebody else a couple of days if they were just writing it and trying to figure it out themselves. And I'm kind of have generated it using this thing, in no time at all. Or a really experienced SQL person would have been able to knock it out probably. But that to get hands on that kind of person is really hard and rare. So that's the benefit of it, I think.
The thing I was wondering about though, Greg, is somehow to be able to sort of teach it. I wish you could sort of teach it style that it would remember. So like, even if you look at that SQL code it generated, it did things like it used as when it had an alias for a column, but it doesn't use as when it does an alias for a table. If you look at the name of the CTEs, they're row sets basically, but notice some are plural, some are not.
Little things like that.
So there's stuff like that you think, I wonder how you could sort of.
You totally can do that. I know, but what it would be as part of, like where I create this prompt, like you're a SQL expert with 20 years experience, you would have to put in as a part of that. And here is the form that you use, and here's your naming conventions, and here's your style and that kind of stuff. If you could kind of succinctly put that together, and actually it's quite good if you kind of say to it, hey, I need to generate a new prompt. That's how I got these prompts in the first place. Like this Analyst Annie prompt, to generate this prompt, you notice they've got the same structure, right? Which is they've got a definition, a purpose, the key elements, an assistant description, context and response format, and a response length. Now this is and additional instructions. This is from, like I was watching, guys who are experts at prompt engineering, and they provide these structures to say, if you're doing a prompt, you need all this stuff. Well, I just gave it that prompt. I gave it the structure. Can't remember where there'll be a prompt generation one in here somewhere. But I wish this had search. I would have to say. But one of these will be generating prompts, right? You can get it to help you generate a prompt that will do that piece. So if you say to it, hey, I need to generate a prompt for you that provides correct SQL syntax and uses certain SQL forms, and then you can provide the documentation about what form you'd like it to use, it'll totally follow that 100%. Now, if you go for too long, it'll forget. So this is why I always create a new chat and put the prompt in at the start rather than continuing on down the bottom here, because by the time you get down here, and I don't know what the exact number of characters is, but there's 64,000 characters or something, it'll forget the original prompt. And then it'll start doing things that you don't want it to do. It'll generate SQL and stuff because it still knows it's doing SQL, but it won't use all of that original prompt advice. So, and I think if you use OpenAI's, like Azure OpenAI, you can potentially have that in as your system prompt, and it'll always use it for every response. So you might have more luck using the APIs for that.
Yeah, that'd be cool.
Yeah, you can also provide it some existing text, and you can say, So if you've got some formatted SQL in the style that you want, you can actually paste that in and say, please copy this style. But kind of in the point that Greg was making is that it forgets. So I find that pasting large bits of text in, it's actually better to do at the start of your prompt. So you may have like a little introduction, and then you put that big chunk of like the SQL in the style that you want, and then the final instruction, it kind of seems to weight more. So you kind of underneath the text, you make sure that you redefine what you're looking for.
It's interesting because even you saw you got a different output when you said, hey, this is T-SQL, but it still sort of kept really like naming conventions from Postgres and stuff like that. So it's sort of an interesting mixture.
It's obviously been trained pretty heavily on Postgres and MySQL for its SQL output, your default SQL output. And so you would potentially need to give it a little bit of guidance about what your expectation is if you need it to do that. Yeah. The last thing on kind of code generation and stuff is it's really good at translating API documentation into something that kind of works, or at least gets you started, which I think is a real challenge for a lot of data people when they're faced with APIs, and then they're like, oh, how do I kind of approach this? If you need a plain English description of how the API kind of connects and what sort of authentication you need to do and all that kind of stuff, it's really good for that. So I'd say kind of API connection and translation, it's pretty good at. But I haven't got an example here of that, unfortunately. But I know I have done it in the past, and it's pretty good. So I'll give it a 7 out of 10 for API connection, connectivity, translation.
I wonder what it's like with things that people commonly look up, like connection string formats and all that sort of stuff. Yeah, it'd be interesting.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, there's so much to play around with potentially, So, all right, moving into kind of the report world, I did create Visionary Victoria. Her job was to give me ideas for data visualizations. Not ideal. I'll show you the prompt. So I probably need to work on this, and I think this is another thing where you potentially need to do it incrementally, but I don't know if you're ever really going to get to if you had to do a complex visual, you probably got no chance. You probably just have to do it yourself. There's probably but you certainly can generate basic visualizations. It actually does sometimes make suggestions that that I didn't really think of as a solution, and I was kind of like, oh yeah, I can see how that shows it answers that question. So what I did is I gave it the table, I gave it a bunch of the questions from Question Quentin, I gave it the fact table, just the structure, and the dimension table structures. And then I said, hey, here is our question. What is the average default score carrier over time? Does it show any specific trend? And then can you suggest some visualizations? So it says a line chart for the default and a bar chart for the average default score for character. It only ever suggests pretty basic kind of visualizations. It does do kind of what you asked it to do, but it's not going to win any visualization awards. There's no doubt about that. Suggests a box and whisker plot and heat map. So, but I wouldn't say that it's no better than you just kind of going, oh, let's try one of these. Let's try one of those. I don't think you'd save yourself any time getting it to suggest visuals to you. So I don't know if Visionary Victoria is still definitely a work in progress. I wouldn't say she does a particularly great job. It would be interesting to think about maybe if you should get it to suggest report structure. Like, hey, because like usually what I'll do for report structure is I'll base it usually on some kind of question, right? So, or sometimes it's a theme of questions that all of the visualizations answer. So you maybe could get it to help you with that. How should I structure this report? How many pages should I have? Like that stuff can be really good for estimating with customers as well. Like if you can very quickly have a look at the tables, have a look at the model, ask a bunch of questions and then suggest a report structure, you can pretty quickly get to an estimate. We think to generate a report off this data would take us 5 days or whatever. Maybe there's something there. I haven't created a prompt for that, but I think the visual stuff 50-50. I'm going to say suggesting visuals, I'll give it a 5 because it does sometimes give some interesting suggestions that I hadn't thought of. So suggesting visuals, 5 out of 10. Is there anything else? There's creating connectors. Oh, DAX Dynamo Dave. Not great at DAX. I find it, and this is again the problem. It's like, why did you stop it? Half wrote the DAX query for me and then stopped. That's because it wrote so much preamble. So this is it trying to just, what I said to it was, hey, here's all the questions. Can you just write a bunch of measures that do that? And it didn't do well with syntax, and it created some pretty interesting. Well, it didn't do terribly, but its approach was really weird. Like, it created this all statement in all these calculates, and that was kind of, it worked, yes, but I don't know if it was ideal. And it didn't create, there was a lot of kind of problems. This is definitely a work in progress. I think playing around with DAX is, and it'll be like, you've already got the built-in DAX stuff inside Power BI. So I probably wouldn't bother too much with trying to do DAX in ChatGPT. It's probably, you probably got other better options like suggestions, measure suggestions, and then upcoming Copilot will definitely do this kind of stuff as well. So I'd say writing DAX, generating DAX code from scratch, not so good. And then I haven't done a lot of experimentation with generating DAX code incrementally. So that's probably something where maybe we could get it to do something, but yeah, definitely from scratch, it's almost a no-brainer. You just don't bother.
Yeah, once there's like the code compiler widely available, I think it may be better, especially if you can upload like a PDF of the DAX documentation or something like that, and it can refer to that, then I think it'll be much better. But yeah, it's definitely terrible at new DAX already.
Yeah, it struggles for sure. Struggles. So overall, I would say it's not. There's some things it's really strong at. Some things it's not so strong at. I think there's probably other use cases I haven't quite thought of. Anything visual, it's quite hard, right? Because it's a text-based thing. So if you've got any other ideas about visual, designing prompt. There's that prompt engineering stuff. That's awesome, Lance. Thanks. I would say the early stages, like documenting your table structure, documenting your code, which is one I give it a 10 for documenting code. I love it for documenting code. Right, that's awesome for that. Documenting table structure, it's great at. Summarizing the written requirements of users, that's fantastic for. Creating business questions is pretty good at. And incremental code generation for things like SQL and M and stuff, I think it could be quite good at. Definitely good at sort of handling APIs and stuff. But if you're generating anything from scratch, or you're wanting it to do visualization, then obviously that's not going to be great. But overall, pretty good. Like, it's definitely a useful tool to have by your side. I've definitely used it and saved myself a ton of time in situations where we needed to generate stuff pretty quickly. I was able to get to a point where we could kind of demo stuff, which is what that SQL was. It's really, really good for that kind of stuff. So definitely something to have in your back pocket as a tool. I don't think it's going to be replacing the meat popsicles anytime soon, but it's like a really good spell checker, right? It just is really good at generating that kind of stuff. It's fantastic for writing like emails and generating documentation and user guides. Let's put that in because that's good. It's great for user guides. give it a 9 out of 10 for user guides, right? They're the things
great.
that you...
It's great for proposals and official like documentation where you have to hit like a certain number of particular things, like you've got to provide your justification and your like all that stuff. It just spits that out.
Yeah.
And training and learning, I think, educating the newbies.
Yeah.
Good. Yeah.
Training and learning. The noobs. Give that an 8, I reckon, for training and learning. It's great if you're trying to learn like a language you've never. If you've got good fundamentals in kind of code generation. So say you know SQL really well and you're trying to learn M, it'll be really good at it, at teaching you, because you already know, okay, I want to do this in SQL and it can translate to the equivalent M. That kind of stuff it's really great for. Then overall, yeah, I think super useful. Definitely a paradigm shift in the way that we work, for sure. And potentially, like, it's obviously got potential to do all sorts of scary things, and who knows what the future holds. But right now, there's certain things that you can use ChatGPT for that will save you so much time and effort, that I would recommend that you definitely check it out. It's worth the money for the GPT-4 and the extra speed to have as a tool in your toolkit, because it's only $20 a month or something. You might as well check it out. So big recommendation on GPT-4. Now we've got like 10 minutes or so to have a bit of a talk about Microsoft Fabric. Yeah, man, there's a lot going on. The best thing that I've seen so far, and big props to the guy at Data Goblins, is his summary of that. So hopefully he's got all of his information on the thing, so that you can. I'll make sure there's a link so people can go to his site. I had his thing open earlier. Oh God, where have I saved it? Someone sent it to us in our... 1 second. I'll send us to the actual site. Here it is. Datagoblins.com, Fabric announcements.
I posted it in, Greg.
That was you, Rob. Yeah. I just grabbed it from there. Yeah. Rez has got... Oh, there you go. Thanks, Rob. And Rez has got his Microsoft Fabric summary as well. Yeah, Rez has got some stuff out, which is awesome. Does he have it? Oh, here's a PDF. I've already downloaded it, but let's see if I can find I'll just download it again. What a great guy. He doesn't ask me for my details. He just gives us this PDF for free. I'd strongly recommend this blog, this Data Goblins. It's so good. All right. So, man, there's a lot to think about here. And for anyone who's in my team, Rob, we're going to be talking about it this afternoon, obviously, but lots to unpack. So I've got it enabled in my Power BI tenant. Let's have a quick look. Why not? So the first thing you need to do for Fabric is you need to enable it in your tenant. If you haven't got it enabled in your tenant, it will not work. You won't get the things that... So if you're wondering why... Oh, look, see a little Fabric logo came up there. That's cool. I've got 59 days left in my trial. So what you need to do is you go to your admin settings. Down in your admin portal, you need to be an admin. It's right at the top. Microsoft Fabric. Users can create Fabric items, public preview, enabled for the... So this will be off by default, so you won't be able to use it unless you have this turned on. If you don't have this, people have posted a bunch of ways you can get a free trial. I saw a few things online for getting free trials. There's lots of different techniques for getting free Office 365 trials to try this stuff out. So definitely check out the Fabric stuff while it's on trial. Calculation groups are integrated. Indeed, they are. There's lots of authoring calculation groups. See, there it is. So you need to turn this on, and then when you turn this on and you go to your Fabric workspace, so you create a new workspace, and I've got one that's called Fabric Playground. It's got this little diamond next to it because it's got Fabric content. And you hit new, and then you've got show all, and then here's all the things you can do. wait 15 minutes for the setup. Yes, that's true. Thanks, Lance. You got to wait. It'll tell you that when you enable it. It says it takes about 15 minutes for it to spin up. So Fabric brings a whole bunch of new capability into Power BI, and I'm not surprised that I'm wondering if they're just going to rename Power BI to Fabric, and then Power BI will be some kind of subset of Fabric, or I don't know exactly what's going to happen, but it feels like.
Well, when you log in now, it just shows the Fabric icon.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
My conspiracy theory is the Power BI color change 2 months ago into the green.
The green. Fabric is green. You're right. I love that conspiracy theory. I'm not allowed to have conspiracy theories because I'm an MVP and I have insider knowledge, and so I shouldn't speculate. I actually don't know anything about that though, but that's a great conspiracy theory. The green fabric, it all becomes clear. Dun dun dun. Wow. All right. So will this say Fabric instead of Power BI? And will I go to Fabric dot? I don't know. Data engineering. So what does Fabric do? For those of you that have been under a rock for the last 2 days in the Power BI world and you missed the build announcements, they've announced this whole new set of capability inside the Power BI, portal, which allows us to do pretty much all the things Power BI couldn't do before, which is really the back end stuff. You hear people talking about tools like Databricks, Synapse, Azure Data Warehouse, SQL, all of that kind of stuff, Python sort of notebooks, that kind of stuff, Spark, all these technologies that if you're an analyst in the Power BI world, you will have potentially heard people talking about, but not really quite understood what they were really on about. This capability is now being brought into the Power BI world, which means that there's a whole new world opening up for those who are interested in it. I think if you're just like a normal everyday analyst, you probably don't have to worry too much about the Fabric stuff. Power BI will just work the same way as you used to. But if you are like a consultant or you're someone who's responsible for end-to-end data, basically from source data all the way through to the analyst thing, then this should be very interesting to you. Now, notwithstanding, I don't know anything about pricing or how it's going to work, and it'll be really interesting to see what happens with all of that when it comes out. I assume it'll be some kind of capacity-based pricing. You'll need to obviously spend money on compute and for storage. Storage will be cheap because that'll be Azure Data Lake Gen 2. Compute will potentially be quite expensive because you're processing potentially a lot of data. So it'll be interesting to see how they price it. I don't know if it'll be presumably some kind of subscription similar to premium, I'd have to think, because they want to make this a SaaS product.
Yeah, in my talking with one of the guys on the Power BI team, he was saying that there's no, I was like, can I enable this for my organization? Are there any gotchas? And he's like, no, there's no gotchas. It just tags into your premium subscription. So that's kind of the downside, is it's only for people with premium at this stage.
Yeah, and I think it will just stay premium for quite a while because of the compute requirement. So you potentially, for your minimum Fabric stuff is going to be pretty expensive. So if you need to run like a really lean, now there'll be aspects of it that'll go across the board. But if you need to run a really lean, really cheap data pipeline because you're a small company, you don't have a lot of budget, and you can't necessarily get yourself a premium subscription. See, the interesting thing though is that the way they do licensing for data marts is don't they allow PPU to use data marts? So maybe it will allow, maybe it will just be a PPU thing.
No, there's stuff already published that shows, yeah. But basically, yeah, when I tried it first up with PPU, the first thing I did was create a lakehouse, and it worked. And I thought, oh, okay, cool. So it looks like it'll work with PPU. Turns out I picked the thing that will work.
Oh, the only thing that works in PPU.
Yeah. What they're saying is basically all the Power BI related stuff will still work with PPU. But the other Fabric experiences don't.
That makes sense. Yeah. Okay. Because you need compute, right? It's the same with, like, you can't just get like a Synapse like cluster or whatever spun up and then be able to use that on a monthly basis. So there needs to be a compute capacity associated with it. And same with Spark, right? It's the same, you know.
Yeah,
So
but again, two different ways to buy it though too, because you've got the via the Power BI route, and you've also got via the Azure route. So
do they have
purchasing stuff that way. Yeah.
Do they have an Azure? Oh, awesome. So yeah, okay. Well, yeah, I don't. So I never like the Office licensing when they have Office licensing, because it's always just like monthly, and then it's just, you know, pay $1 million or whatever, and you get your thing. But if they've got an Azure licensing option, that'd probably be good, because Azure licensing is usually hourly, and you can kind of turn it off and turn it on and do that kind of stuff.
Like the A SKUs have been there, but there's
the embedded SKUs.
There's actual stuff you'll be able to buy via Azure licensing. Yeah.
Cool.
And I think the aim was to have a lower entry point because we push back on premium and stuff. And then keep in mind, you're going to be having access to a lot of stuff in a single lot of pricing that previously, you know, all had separate pricing. So
yeah, you would have been spinning up. You would have been spinning up all sorts of different services to do the same thing. Yeah. Anyway, there's quite a few different capabilities here. So obviously there's like storing data in a lake. There's this new thing called One Lake. So you got the One Lake data hub here. So it's OneDrive, but it's a data lake. I'm really happy that they're using Parquet and Delta tables as the native format. I think that is a very smart decision.
Although it brings some things too, Greg, like, you know, tables can't have spaces in the names, you know, all these sorts of things. So
yeah. It'll bring its own foibles, I'm sure.
I think there'll be some interesting things there.
It'd be interesting to see how it's kind of stores it in the back end and that kind of stuff when you drag tables in. I haven't played too much around with that kind of stuff.
Depends where it comes from too, because the thing is they've gone to a lot of trouble to make sure they order the data in the Parquet files as optimally as possible for work with Power BI and stuff like that via Direct Lake. But if you just go off and grab a random Parquet file from somewhere else, so it'll work, but it won't run at the same speed as one.
It won't have generated. The same optimizations. Yeah, and there's a bit of that was always the case with like that whole Delta overlay as well, wasn't it? It's like Parquet, you could just grab a Parquet file and throw it in. But if you've got it set up as a Delta table, then you get all of this extra time travel and all this kind of stuff functionality and I'd like to think that all of that stuff's going to be in here as well. So we've got data lake, so we get and then we have this data factory idea has come back, and we've got this new thing called data flow Gen 2. So good old prep and clean data. So data flows that you're used to using Power Query, but obviously a Gen 2 version of that. So that's pretty cool. And then this concept of data pipelines, which if those of you that work in Synapse or in Data Factory will be familiar with the concept of a pipeline. So similar to SSIS, I guess, it's like orchestration of data.
Yeah, so you've got both. It's actually a bit of still a step back at the moment. So like if you look at ADF in market, it's fairly mature now and got a lot of capabilities. If you look at the Synapse pipelines, they're not as capable, and this is less capable again.
Third, yeah. So I don't like it when they do that. I really wish this was just a window into Data Factory, but yeah.
No. There's really good reasons they didn't do that though, because things like if you're in, say, the Lakehouse and you say, create me a new pipeline, then it assumes automatically that you want to connect it up to the Lakehouse's output, right, and so on. So like there's a whole lot of that sort of integration goes on, which is sweet. You know, that's kind of nice. But I think the thing that interests me there is if you look at the method they used with Power BI, where they had, you know, push a thing out in the market and it was pretty green and it just got better and better and better. That's one thing. But when you take this, where you've got bits of it that are already in market as much more mature products, they're now sort of competing with their own product when they put it in market. And that's interesting. Yeah.
It's always interesting where you have to make a decision between Synapse and Data Factory and be like, every now and then we'll have a customer that's like, I'd prefer to use Power Query. That's kind of what I know. We're like, well, you can't have Synapse pipelines. You need to use Data Factory for that. You know, like it's just like little things that create those issues. And I can imagine it'll happen again with this.
Yeah, and of course the UI is completely integrated. So things like when I started using the pipelines in here, like I couldn't find stuff, and you know, I work with data factory every day. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So,
So all your muscle memory has to change. Yep. I've got a question from Lance. Can you use the current ADF application with Lakehouse without using this new one? The current, can you use Azure Data Factory with your Lakehouse, or with the Lakehouse here? I think.
Yeah, that's right. So if you're losing sort of functionality or features using Synapse, can you go back to ADF with this Lakehouse? Like, can you? That's what I'm saying. Does it?
Yeah. Could you point to this
warranty?
Lakehouse? Yeah.
Yeah, correct.
My understanding. Oh, that's a good question. I don't know if have you had a look at it, Greg?
yeah,
Is there? You can,
yeah,
right?
Yeah, it's and the other thing is too that ADF will stay in market as a product as well, right? So
yeah, absolutely. It'll just be the Azure standalone data movement product. This is going to be an integrated product, so that's good to know that the Lakehouse will be available to those other Azure services, because there's going to be all sorts of things you potentially want to do with that outside of this.
Yeah, I think one of the really big things about going to an open standard format and stuff is they're saying that they don't care in a lot of ways, what tools you want to use, having it in the one format, and that's a key advantage over the snowflakes and the things like that.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, that's a thing that is always in high demand, right? Is that you're going to have some organizations where there's just going to be one guy who just wants to use Databricks or something over the top, and give them the option to do that is really good. That's going to just broaden adoption so much. Couple of data science kind of bits and pieces. This will be obviously Azure ML and all of those bits and pieces at the back end. I think that's pretty well established as a part of data flows now. You can kind of spin up ML models. I imagine that'll work pretty similar in this way. You've obviously got notebooks now and Spark, so you can potentially interact with ML through those as well. So that'll be. I'm not a big data science ML guy, but it's definitely going to be interesting to see how that kind of works. I'm going to definitely go hardcore on making sure I understand how this particular one works. And then warehouse. So this is obviously going to be your SQL storage warehouse, right? Now, is the back end going to be something like, is it going to be like Synapse clustered SQL, or is it going to be more like a data mart?
The data warehouses come from two places, right? So you got the Lakehouse. When you have a Lakehouse, they create a default warehouse off that Lakehouse. So that's there already, but you can then create a warehouse which is more like a SQL DW warehouse. But again, in terms of the language, like if you look at where SQL Server is, you look at where SQL DW, dedicated SQL pools are in Synapse, they're a long way back, and this is further back again. But the thinking is that, like, if you had data in the Lakehouse, you'll be able to run SQL queries over it, or Spark SQL queries over it, or Python queries, and it doesn't matter.
Yeah. Oh, okay. A Synapse data warehouse or warehouse is labeled as a warehouse, so that becomes then like your Synapse.
Yeah, so they kind of had a struggle because, like, they had this concept of a warehouse, but then they had two concepts of a warehouse, and people going, hang on. So what they're now talking about is just the SQL endpoint, and it doesn't matter under the covers whether it's a Lakehouse or whether it's
a
separate warehouse.
Oh, I see. Because people just want to write SQL against whatever data.
Yeah. The
Lakehouse is your kind of Spark based kind of like driven by the. So
the Lakehouse is that stuff based over that, and again in those Parquet files, but that does give you the ability to run SQL against any of those things, or run Spark against any of those things. Yeah.
And if I needed to materialize a massive table, that's where you're going to potentially spin up warehouse, right? Is that? That'd be the current use case. Yeah. So if you've got a trillion rows and you need it to run really fast, you need to that's where you're going to be warehousing that data to make it optimize it for analysis and get it going. Your Lakehouse is going to do that is going to do queries on demand. And so potentially really large tables might need to be materialized into warehouse to make them work. Yeah.
Originally, the Lakehouse stuff was pretty much read-only as well, but it's heading down the path of read-write as well.
Oh, okay, interesting. Yeah, it's saying, okay, so read-write, any read-write scenario is potentially that as well. Okay. Very interesting. And then I think we're going to have to wrap it up soon, but oh, where did I go? Here. And then all of your normal Power BI is at the front end. Then there's real time and KQL, so Custo. So that's a whole other. That's probably a fairly new area for people as well to look at. Looking at how that kind of works, I think real-time analytics has always been in the realms of kind of event hubs and stream analytics and bits like that in the Microsoft world. And I know you could have those, you know, like you had streaming data sets and things like that, and there was streaming data flows at one point. And so I think there's a little bit of relearning for us to figure out the new paradigm for real-time, because their real-time story wasn't very clear. So that will be interesting to play around with as well. So man, it's just got all the things. It's got all the things. So cool. Anyway, folks, I think we have to wrap it up. As of next week, we're going to start diving into Fabric. I'll have to come up with, I don't know, I'm just going to literally start playing around with it and come up with new things each week. This is Lunch and Learn. It is always me just making it up as I go along. But check out this Goblin Guide. It gives you an idea of all the different bits and pieces that you can do. Obviously, there's a ton of content online. Check out LinkedIn. It's exploding with things around Fabric and what's happening. There's a bunch of upcoming webinars and post-build kind of sessions and things like that. You should be able to check it out if you're interested in Fabric and have a play with it. It's ready to go and it's available now to play with. So see how you go with it. Keep me posted on where you're up to, and then yeah, we'll see how it all works out. That's it. Have a great week, everybody. Have a great weekend, and yeah, we'll see you soon.
Thanks, guys. Take care, folks. Bye-bye.
Thank you.